Hello, and welcome to Theorizing with a Hammer with C. Derick Varn. And today we're going to talk about why this show is called Theorizing with a Hammer. Now, anyone who knows their philosophy knows that Theorizing with a Hammer is a play on the subtitle of Nietzsche's 1888 book, The Twilight of the Idols, or Philosophizing with a Hammer. But what we might want to go back to is the dual metaphor in Nietzsche's original invocation of the hammer. So the hammer he was talking about was dealing with the different idols of ideas. And in German, the title also sounds like a pun on Wagner's opera, Götterdämmerung, or The Twilight of the Gods, because the word for idol in German, Götze, is close to Götter, and one means God and the other means, or gods, and the other means false god. So Nietzsche is trying to give us a way to find the false gods, the false things in our brain that hold us up. And he actually attributes, believe it or not, formal logic as being one of the false things in our brains that hold us up. Who does Nietzsche put in that book as the answer to Socrates? He puts the sophist, he puts the artist, he puts vitalist, as opposed to Socrates' dialectic. The Socratesian dialectic is the dialogues that you have recorded from Socrates, by the way. To use a hammer is first to use a tuning fork. And this, again, is from Francis Bacon. You test the idea. Boom! You see how it resonates. Boom! If it resonates hollow, boom! Then you use the second form of the hammer, and you smash the idol. Why then is it not just philosophizing with a hammer? Why is it theorizing with a hammer? Well, in here we need to go back to the ancient Greek word theoria, which means looking at, viewing, or beholding in ancient Greek, and came to mean, by the time you get to people like Pythagoras, pondering the contemplation of the natural world and of math. So the theory would be to look at the natural world and derive the kind of mathematical knowledge from, according to Pythagoras, like the hymn of the spear. All right. Aristotle formalizes the terminology, and in contrast to theory, theoria with praxis. Now, interestingly enough, Marxist philosophers like Alain Balibar will come back to this Aristotelian framework and add some more stuff to it. But in Aristotle's view, praxis is aiming with desired action. So we have something we want to achieve. That is our thought. It sets the teleology, or the reason for the practice, and then we practice until that thing becomes, and that is praxis. Now, in Marxist critical theory, we often hear, actionist or movements is set. Then theoria is a combination, is the theory, and then praxis is a combination of the movement of the people with the theory. Right. That is how that you don't get that from Marx. You don't get that from Engels. You get that from primarily from French thinkers. The most recent one I read who set this up this way was Balibar. But the point is, we are theorizing with a hammer because we're trying to remove the contemplation frameworks, to use an obnoxious term, that stop us from understanding things. We're not just trying to win debates here, all right? If you're with me on this journey, you're not just trying to become a logic bro or even come up with a better systemization. The systemization serves a purpose, all right? It is a rubric to which we can view truths, but all models are in some degree false or incomplete, all right? And I'm going to do a whole episode just on that concept. You can't have a model that completely explains everything within a system. All right. And in fact, so we have to deal with that. We also have to deal with both over and under determination. So under determination is the idea that the evidence is insufficient to identify what belief should hold from the evidence. So we look at a bunch of numbers and they're underdetermined. Like we don't know which theory, which framework, which model, which explanation for the world could actually explain the evidence that we have. When you're thinking about underdetermination, what that tends to do is it tends to lead you into just defaulting to your priors, whether you realize it or not. And when we say priors here, this is a word from statistics, but it's like the things that you know, believe, have been trained to believe, the assumptions that you have about the world. And they can stem from your class, your identity, your lived experiences, your biological temperaments, when I say biological temperaments, there are such things as people who have a temperament towards anger or whatever, and not just in humans. Um, your different symbolization patterns, and by symbolization patterns, we usually mean language, but not just that. I mean, there's all kinds of cultural meaning making tied into that. And so underdetermination in a theory opens up all these problems. You can just sneak all the stuff back in. Overdetermination is when a single effect is determined by multiple causes, and you can't figure out which one is the one that determines the effect. All right. So this comes out of philosophy of science, and it specifically was used a lot by Freud in his psychoanalysis. Like you can often not, when you look at someone's motivation for what they're doing, you often have so many different causal possibilities and things in people's narrative, and things in their experience in life that you can't really pull out which one is actually the one that really is the determining factor or other cause. Let's go back to the 2 points of theorizing with a hammer. Why are we theorizing with a hammer? We're getting rid of the idols in our own head. But two things I want to now delineate. We have so far really only dealt with practices of critical thinking. We haven't really got into until this episode. What makes critical theory different from critical thinking? They really kind of are different. And one of the things about it is, when you talk to like every basic survey of what makes 20th century thinking so different, from is the triple. You'll hear the triple threat of Darwin, Freud, and Marx. All right. This is what I was taught in like my basic survey of Western intellectual history, right? And what they introduce is a rubric of suspicion, like how much of our means of thinking is determined by the ideological constructions of the modes of production. Okay, that's a bunch of Marxist jargon, but let's break down what it means. Basically, how much of our ways of explaining and justifying our relationships with the economy, with politics, which are also kind of related, and with other people, of which both the economy and politics are abstractions from, really does color what we think. And, Freud, how many of these unconscious drives color what we think? And from Darwin, how much do our want to continue to exist and to perpetuate our DNA? Although he wouldn't have talked about DNA because they didn't understand genetics that. But how much of our drive to exist and perpetuate ourselves drives what we think and do? These are the heuristics of suspicion that we add to logic. And so we know now, following Nietzsche, that logic isn't perfect. I mean, Nietzsche is also in this tradition, although people will tell you he's a reactionary. I think he is very clearly an anti-liberal, and has some kind of nascent aristocratic bent around him, but he may not be that consistent. When we are theorizing with a hammer, we are taking into account these things. Now, in modern terms, we can add to that much more advanced forms of dealing with symbolic mediation. So that means all the things that we use to process our world through symbols. Much more advanced knowledge of our reproductive drives, and we get this from comparative biology and anthropology. Much more advanced knowledge of our cultural norms and signifiers, which is kind of a more advanced form of symbolic mediation. And we see that we are always already put into place where we don't ever have a blank slate to pull from, either culturally nor in person. And we now have to take some way of taking that critical thinking and turning it into something sharper, because we've clearly seen, as I've mentioned in every video, people who can use critical thinking to just defend, whatever they want to believe. And you can even see this with Marxists. We don't even have to go to the obvious example is conspiracy theorists, but we can talk to Marxists. There's this old way of looking at Marxism where we know that capitalism is going to fail by, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1967, 1981, 2002, 2007, now. All right. And this has often led to people making the quip that Marxism is a theory that gives you the ability to talk about everything but actually know very little. And so we want to knock the idols out there too. That is kind of telling you why this show is called what it is, what its aims are. I hope it is more explicit. Yes, we're going to go through basic concepts. We're going to go through advanced concepts. We're going to talk about a particular theorist. But the goal is very specific. It is not just to train you into logic. You can go to Ben Burgess for that, right? It is to get you to really be critical of what you think you know, and to use that tuning fork to get rid of the false idols. But the other thing about the tuning fork, guys, is it doesn't always hit false. There are some things worth keeping and defending, but we need a way to know what they are. And with that, I hope you check us out here on Zero Books channel. Hit the little bell if you like what we do here. You can catch me on every other Thursday night at Pop the Left live stream and its Parrot Room behind the Patreon wall. And you can find me at Emancipation Network on Mortal Science. I'm also a regular here on other things on Zero Books. And I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.